New horizons, Karna and Uruvi. Standing at her balcony, Uruvi thought wistfully how this was the last night she would be spending in Pukia, in the house where her first wakeful memories were centered. She stared at the darkening sky through the balustrade fringed with leaves, seeing moments of her childhood in a quick flashback. With a start she realized she had rarely cried in this house. The moments she recalled were full of innocent laughter and bliss, except those heart-wrenching times when her father had left for battle, which were often enough to snuff out her joy. Uruvi was suddenly swamped with a surge of sadness at the thought of parting from her home and her parents, yet she was bursting with excitement at the thought of a new life with Karna, whom she had longed for so long. At this moment, though, she sheepishly confessed to herself, she was nervous about coming face to face with the man she had seen vividly in her dreams almost every day. In her dreams he never spoke to her, now he would. Would he smile, would he laugh, would he touch her as she had wildly imagined? Or would he be cold and indifferent? And it was that look of uncertainty that Karna caught as he entered the bridal room. His new bride gazed at him, her mouth dry, overcome with a stifling shyness. He stood quietly, tall and distant. They were two strangers meeting for the first time, yet they were bound together by marriage. She watched him approach her, his lips in a straight, almost stern line, his eyes dark and deep. She could not wrench her gaze off him, just as she hadn't been able to do during the Swayamwara. She thirstily drank in the sight of him, parched with years of pining. It was his eyes, those twin spheres of molten gold, that held a strange magnetism. From what she had seen of him, it was his eyes that flashed intermittently with either rage or resentment, or softened suddenly with unimaginable gentleness. But within them lay an unfathomable sadness that seemed to suffuse his being. She felt him standing close to her, but not obtrusively so. It felt as if she had wished for this moment since eternity. She looked up at him through her veil, wishing that the moment would last forever, and her nervousness inexplicably vanished. But nothing prepared her for his blunt question. "Why did you marry me?" he asked quietly, without preamble. Famous first words, she thought wryly, and definitely not the most romantic either. "Is this a game?" he rasped, a frown marring his handsome features. "A new ploy? Or were you forced into this marriage?" She wondered why he was so disturbed. She looked at him, her eyes gazing straight into his, undaunted and calm. "I married you because I have loved you since the day I first saw you," she replied with equanimity. She had the small, irrational pleasure of seeing him look flabbergasted. "But we have never met," he breathed, barely managing to suppress his surprise. "I fell in love with you even before I met you," she confessed quietly. "You can't have been in love with a dream." He looked bewildered. "At that day of the archery contest at Hostenapur, I decided I would marry no one else but you," she said steadily, her eyes as unwavering as her voice. "You seriously believe I was forced into marrying you after what happened at the Swayamwara?" She countered with a dry laugh. "On the contrary. What you witnessed at the marriage hall was just a small hint of what happened at home while convincing my parents. Frankly, they weren't too pleased with my choice either and certainly did not wish me to marry you," she admitted candidly. "That doesn't come as a surprise," said Karna without resentment. "I'm sure many people must have enlightened you by now about the fact that I am not exactly eligible. I grew up loving you. I had decided to marry you a long time ago even though I know that I didn't even exist for you till now. And yet you went ahead to marry me against all odds," he quietly interrupted, "against all that antagonism, opposition and disgrace." As he spelled out the words, the gravity of her deed hit him hard. It had struck him the moment she had started walking towards him, with the garland in her hands, at the Swayamwara hall. He had wanted to get up and stop her then, had wanted to dissuade her, wanted to push her away, to make her flee from the terrible realities of his life. But he had been utterly mesmerized by the beauty of the moment, just as he was now. Looking at the exquisitely lovely girl standing so close to him, he found himself helpless before her fragile beauty, a beauty infused with a fierce determination. He felt suddenly the attraction and magnetism of this girl. There was a tumultuous vitality in her, a forceful power. She was the kind of girl, he thought, a man could easily lose his head over. For the first time, he looked closely at the girl whom his rival, Arjuna, was supposed to marry. She was a picture of wistful charm. His inscrutable glance hovered hesitantly for a long moment over her soft lips, moved to her small, pointed chin, her tiny upturned nose, which accentuated her air of arrogance, to wander slowly over her petite figure draped demurely in bridal finery that could not sheath the seductive voluptuousness that lay beneath. His eyes traveled back up to her questioning, almost defiant face, and their eyes locked in a lingering gaze. But his doubt distracted him. He could not fathom why this princess had stooped to marry a social outcast like him. He persisted. "Princess, you have decided to follow the hard path. I cannot promise you the life a royal princess deserves," he began slowly. "I am a wanderer myself, stuck in an eternal search. I am a vagabond who doesn't know where I am going. My past beckons my present, but I can see only a blurred future. All my life, I have been slighted as a person of low birth, and the stigma will rub off on you as well. Yet, I am not ashamed of who I am. I am proud to be Radheya, the Sutaputra, the son of Adiratha and Radha. As soon as my father found me, he held me close and took me home. From her selfless affection for me, my mother's breasts were filled with milk that very day. She has looked after me, loved me and tutored me. And I too, will always regard them, Radha and Adiratha, as my parents. I have been brought up in the Suta tradition and have got married to a Suta bride. I am a married man, happy with my wife Vrushali, the gentlest person ever. But you are a Kshatriya princess. How will you be able to live with a Sutaputra? A Sutaputra who was born to show valor and to achieve glory," Uruvi corrected him gently, unfazed by his self-castigation. "For me, that makes you enough of a Kshatriya. You have attained fame and glory as a brave, formidable warrior. You are a good man, a generous, kind person. What more could I ask for? Honor is not in a name or status but what you carry in your heart." "The princess argues well," Karna conceded with a reluctant amusement he did not dare reveal. "You are kind, princess, the world is not so generous," he bowed. "I have been reminded in more ways than one where I stand in society. I know it, I hate it, but I can't do anything about it," he shrugged as if to brush off the burden of insults heaped upon him. "And I don't want you to suffer the same humiliation because of me. You got a small dose of it today, but there'll be more to come, a more bitter medicine to swallow each time." "A medicine is supposed to cure," she answered, her tone light. "And if you have finished with my cross-examination, may I start with mine?" She looked up at him, a mischievous glint in her pretty eyes. He tilted his head questioningly. "Why did you come for my Swayamvara?" she asked directly, unswerving in her stare. "What game were you playing?" She mimicked him. "A cat and mouse one. I wanted to see Arjuna's latest bride," he admitted, a wicked gleam in his sunset eyes. "But, seriously, I wanted to know who had dared to send me an invitation, knowing full well that I had stopped attending Swayamvaras after what happened at Princess Draupadi's." His voice hardened perceptibly. "All my life I have endured taunts, insults and humiliation for being a Sutaputra, but coming from a woman, a princess at her own Swayamvara, was the most damning," he said, the heat of suppressed anger burning through his voice. "Draupadi proudly declared herself to be a bride to be won by the worthiest and the very best. I was neither, she reminded me. I was a low-born Sutaputra who had dared to dream. She openly mocked me, saying that I could not be allowed to win her hand in marriage. I can never forget it, her words, her haughtiness, the people in the hall sniggering, I can never forget that hateful day. She was responsible for my son's death too, he said, rage simmering in his voice. What I lost that day, besides my self-respect and self-worth, was also my son, Sudama. He was killed in the scuffle after the Swayamwara. And that haughty, heartless princess didn't turn a hair, she went off with her new husband Arjuna, without bothering to look back at the havoc she had wreaked. I will never forgive her nor myself for that, he vowed, his eyes burning in fury. Hearing him utter Draupadi's name, Uruvi's initial flash of jealousy was doused by a dawning comprehension. Karna loathed Draupadi. Her blatant rejection and her disparagement of Karna were like a raw nerve, reminding him painfully of the humiliation she had inflicted on him. Unrelenting in his festering hatred, was he the proud man scorned in love, or was he the grieving father, inconsolable at his son's brutal death? Or, reflected Uruvi with a sinking feeling, were both emotions torturing him? Karna's face was masked again in a brooding shroud, cocooning his cold, closed self. Uruvi wondered frantically how she could salvage the relaxed moment they had shared. I know what happened at Princess Draupadi's Swayamwara, she said evenly. But I invited you because you were the only one I wanted to marry. Had you not turned up, the Swayamwara would have been called off and I wouldn't have married anyone else. The finality of her words shocked him. He could not help being moved by her determination and love for him. Watching the small, slight figure in front of him, Karna felt his rage subside. She was like a fountain of water, reviving him with the water of life and love. He felt a strange emotion, a surge of protective affection for this woman who had fought so desperately to get him. She had him, yes, she did, Karna thought with a sense of fond pride. He felt the first glow of her love and basked in it. He didn't want to ever see her hurt. He recalled the pain in her eyes when she had been insulted by the angry suitors at her own Swayamwara. Anger flamed in his heart, but a larger guilt tore him. It was because of him that she had to hear those terrible words. His conscience, always sensitive, was troubled. A pang seized him when he realized that their future would be an uneasy one. He would be responsible for many more bitter blows to her pride. He had experienced this humiliation himself and knew he still would, but from now on he would be dragging her along with him. It was his turn to relieve the thickening tension between them. I would say I'm glad my curiosity got the better of me, he confessed. When I received the wedding invitation from your esteemed father, I was naturally intrigued about why I was being invited to a Swayamwara where everyone knew whom the bride was going to marry. I confess I was curious to see the bride. You were that perfect princess whom the perfect prince, Arjuna, was to marry. Instead, the iconic princess chose an interloper. It turned out to be a daring decision, which shocked everyone. And, dear princess, I was surprised too, amazed that you selected me over Arjuna. Don't you think you are worth it? She murmured, a smile in her whisper. He dared not touch her. His bride looked so beguilingly beautiful. His eyes raked her body. She was small and slim but straight-backed, deep-bosomed and tiny-waisted, with flaring hips. His eyes caressed her dark hair, her oval face, her trembling lips. He could almost breathe in her fragrance. And then Uruvi saw his beautiful face melting into a small smile for the first time, like the sun coming out of the dark clouds, spreading light everywhere. His smile shone through the darkest pools in his sunset eyes, deep into her soul. Although an upheaval had occurred in the lives of Uruvi and Karna, the palace of the king of Anga was still quiet. That late morning, when the news of Princess Uruvi's stormy Swayamwara reached the palace, its tranquility was rudely shattered, giving way to unaccustomed pandemonium. The person to react most furiously to the news was Shona, Karna's younger brother. I am not against Karna bringing another bride home, but she's a Kshatriya princess, a stranger, an outsider who will never be able to mingle with us. She is sure to disrupt the peace of this house. Worse, she may take him away from us, he warned, voicing aloud his parents' rising trepidation. The old parents, Radha and Adiratha, looked visibly worried. Shatrantapa, or Shona as they fondly called him, disapproved of his brother's new marriage vehemently. Even Vrushali was unable to placate her angry brother-in-law. Her soft-spoken words made him more angry. As his wife, you are the one who is the most affected, yet you accept the situation so calmly. Raged Shona. If he is going to be happy, so be it, she said evenly, smiling softly as she got ready to welcome the newly-wed couple who were on their way home. Shona glowered. It was characteristic of her to respond mildly. She would gladly suffer in silent despair, never allowing her emotions to show, even when matters concerned her so deeply. To Shona, her restraint showed her remarkable resilience. It was in this atmosphere of doubt and distrust that Uruvi was given a traditional welcome as she entered the palace threshold, unaware of the hidden misgivings, but blissful that she was Karna's bride. They had driven for 2 long days from Pukia, traveling along a road that ran by a river, flanked by thick trees. Now and then, she glimpsed the snaking river, smooth and blue. Her new home stood on a little hill, with a winding path leading to it. From a distance, she could see the sprawling sandstone palace, surrounded by a flower-filled garden. It was pretty, but was not as exquisite as her home in Pukia. The first person to welcome her to her new home was Vrushali, standing tall and elegant, holding a silver thali bearing incense, tiny bowls and other items used for the puja, the customary prayers that would take place when the wedded couple entered the palace. Vrushali stooped over Uruvi, making the princess uneasily aware of being dwarfed. It was a sensation unfamiliar to Uruvi. She had always been cheekily confident about her diminutive size. It was her taller friends who eventually got uncomfortable, feeling like giants, next to her, as they often reminded her crossly. Right now, Uruvi firmly overrode her momentary discomfiture. She straightened her back and looked squarely at the woman's calm face. But not for long. Uruvi found she could not hold Vrushali's serene gaze. She wondered if she could endure the scrutiny of the other woman as she performed the arti, circling the silver puja thali around her, the smoke of the flickering earthen lamp clouding the distance between them. At last, Uruvi looked up to glance straight into her rival's liquid eyes, which were far-seeing and wise as if measuring the standards of others by her own scrupulous honesty. Uruvi felt like an intruder, trespassing on the happiness of the woman in front of her. She was emotionally prepared for the censure she thought would come from Karna's wife, or a cold silence expressing an unspoken displeasure in her conduct. But none came, and Uruvi felt her own defenses melting away. Behind her stood Karna's parents and a man who stood a little distance away, as if he did not want to be a participant in the ceremony. She wondered who he was. "That's Shona, my younger brother," she heard her husband whisper softly in her ear. The younger man frowned, mistaking the gesture as an open display of affection between the newly married couple. Uruvi looked at the elderly couple who had nurtured Karna, the golden orphan, bundled in a basket afloat in the calm waters of the holy river Ganga. She felt a sudden surge of affection for them as she looked at them gratefully. Without these people, Karna wouldn't be at her side now. Both looked troubled but visibly happy to see Karna. Radha threw her arms around his neck and kissed him tenderly on his forehead. Adiratha, radiantly happy, stroked his son's face with both his hands. "You are back," he smiled through his tears. He was a slightly built old man, exceedingly thin with a swarthy skin the color of old ebony, his hair sparse, his tearful eyes full of hope and love. Like most brides, Uruvi felt she was a guest in her new home, trespassing on unknown territory, amidst people she had just met but whom she did not know, with those whom she would learn to love but not unconditionally as she did her parents. Stepping into her new home, she had stepped a rung higher into adulthood. Or, as some would remind her, a rung lower on the social scale, she thought wryly. "Please feel welcome here, dear. I hope you will be comfortable," said Radha, ushering her into her room, which Uruvi noticed was in the farthest east wing of the palace, at a considerable distance from Vrusali's room. Radha suddenly looked self-conscious. "Please make yourself comfortable," she repeated. "We may not be able to give you what you are accustomed to, the luxury, the lavishness, we live a little differently," she said contritely. "You have given me Karna." Uruvi's words were simple and sincere and Radha was struck by their raw earnestness. "I heard there was chaos at the Swayamwara when other suitors objected to your choice. You must have had a hard time." "Oh dear, I am handling this so badly." Radha looked flustered. "But don't worry, everything will be fine. You must love him very much to have taken this step, a decision difficult to make and, yes, somewhat unheard of." "Not terribly, I hope." Uruvi and she laughed, the tinkling sound filling the room. Radha smiled back, relaxing a little. "Radheya is special. I knew that the day my husband got him home from the holy river. He was such an enchanting baby, with a captivating smile and his ears adorned with earrings," recalled Radha, her voice suffused with love. "We were childless then, so when my husband found the baby, it was a wish come true. The whole incident was strange. The lost baby drifting along the river, the closed basket full of gold ornaments. The baby himself was so breathtakingly beautiful. Adiratha says he resembled the morning sun, so bright and resplendent was he. He was covered with a golden sheath, like a warrior's armor. He was a wonder, a sight to behold. Adiratha's joy knew no bounds, and he immediately got him home. He claimed the baby looked as if he was not only of royal blood, but of celestial birth. That's why he was sent to a childless couple like us. It is the gods that gifted him to us. After we adopted Radheya, good fortune came our way, we had children of our own soon. But Radheya is irreplaceable and we cannot live without him. His brothers love him unreservedly, especially Shona. For him, Radheya is God. And so this child blessed with beauty, grace and splendor as well as God-given skills came to be known as Radheya, the son of Radha, and also as Vasasana and Virisha," added Uruvi, recalling the tales of bravery she had heard of her hero while she had longed for him. Uruvi was momentarily overwhelmed with the intensity of Radha's emotions. His parents loved him completely, without restraint and reservation, and Vrusali worshipped him with an unwavering devotion. For the first time, Uruvi felt a sense of disquiet, a sliver of doubt pierced her mind as she wondered if her own love for him was as absolute as she thought it was. And more importantly, could he ever love her back, as completely and devotedly as he loved his parents, his brothers and his wife? Was her love magnanimous enough to accept the other's love for him as well? She would have to share him, not just with his parents and his brothers but his wife as well. She knew that sharing, as her parents had realized very early in her life, was not her strong point because as an only child, the love she gave and received was absolute, undivided and exclusive. As she settled down in the palace, she seized any moments she could spend with her husband. When she heard his chariot wheels coming to a stop at the porch, a radiant smile lit up her face. Radha and Vrusali noticed this silent ritual and subtly saw to it that it was Uruvi. Karna went up to meet first. Shona and Adiratha often found the newlyweds talking quietly in the day, and did not hide their amusement at Karna's behavior as an ardent husband. Uruvi could spend hours chatting with her husband, although she did the talking and he did the listening. Her intelligent queries forced him to respond, and he found himself discussing serious topics, which he seldom did with his mother and his wife. Uruvi was refreshingly different from all the other women he had known. As the days wore on, he became aware that what he already felt for her was not the sense of duty a husband reserves for his wife, nor just simple lust. He admired her. Mixed with her vivacity was an inner calmness, a composure, a serenity that relaxed him. He found himself talking to her freely about matters he usually kept to himself: his political affairs, his passion for archery, his boredom with the rich society that he at once despised and yet used to promote himself like a hungry scavenger. It was not mere knowledge, but her ability to comprehend even nuances with a quick, deep perceptiveness. Barely a week after her stormy swayamwera, Karna admitted to himself that he was dangerously drawn to his new bride. There are very fine shades between love and longing, and need and desire, and Karna found himself uncharacteristically confused about his feelings. His fascination seemed to increase with each day. She excited yet soothed him. She was like a haven where he sought refuge, and he knew he could never let go of her. He had been married to Vrushali for many years. His marriage to the Suda princess had been a duty, marked by a devotion which was an innate, instinctive part of his nature, his love for Vrushali being as deep as his love for Radha, like a calm ocean. But he was mesmerized by Uruvi, entranced by her beauty and intelligence. As a man of power and a creature of struggle, Karna realized he was crippled by the ethics he followed, trapped as he was by his own principles. He always kept his word, for one. For everything he did, there was a certain reason, a logical journey from aspiration to determination. He had wanted to be a warrior, he was one today. He was born an orphan, but fate had willed him to be brought up in a large family where love and affection was bountiful. And now, Uruvi had broken all his rules. She had won him, he had not acquired her. Vrushali was mild-mannered, but a woman of spirit. She was tall, dark and soft-spoken, but with a firm lilt in her voice. She clearly kept the family together, and Karna treated her with the utmost love and respect. Although not a pretty woman, her gentleness and natural air proved that beauty did not really matter. As the older daughter-in-law and wife, she treated Uruvi formally with the politeness expected from her. Whenever they met, Vrushali was always cool and unflustered, looking at her steadfastly, without emotion. The two women got on reasonably well, with a cordiality lacking warmth. Uruvi did not feel comfortable with Vrushali, possibly because of her own sense of guilt for intruding in the older woman's marital paradise. Or perhaps the warmth was lacking because of Vrushali's innate aloofness. Uruvi could not really tell. They talked, they chatted, they lunched together, but Uruvi sensed a distance between them. For all their amiability, they remained stubbornly unfamiliar, two strangers under the same roof, sharing and loving the same man. Uruvi was sensitive about the impression she made on others, and beneath Vrushali's smiling, serene countenance, she discerned a certain remoteness. Her rival had already summed her up, and Uruvi knew the conclusion was not an agreeable one. This disturbed Uruvi because she was used to the approval of others. It vaguely annoyed her that she had not impressed the other woman as favorably as she had intended to. Uruvi could not pinpoint the cause, but she knew that the older woman did not think well of her. Shona was a master of cold praise. Uruvi soon realized to her dismay that he disliked her, but she couldn't do a thing to change his poor opinion of her. His innate civility and the affection he felt for his older brother kept him from making a direct statement, but his expression showed his disapproval of her plainly enough. He tried to avoid her, and was so excessively polite when he came face to face with her that it bordered on curtness. However, in spite of himself, and grudgingly so, he had come around and probably did not consider her a threat to his sister-in-law, Vrushali, whom he was fiercely protective about. Unlike their older daughter-in-law, Karna's parents seemed to hold Uruvi in open awe, as if she was a goddess who dared to tread the mortal path. These conflicting responses to her made Uruvi feel lost in her new palace, bereft, without the warmth of the family and friends she missed. She remembered how her father had watched her with a tender smile, her mother's indulgent look as she played the sitar, Kunti's delighted outpouring of affection each time they met, Bhishma Pitama's tolerant smile as she argued vehemently with him, Bhima's relentless yet affectionate teasing. She was so used to the affection which they all so obviously felt for her, and expressed in pampering her. Uruvi had a naivete, a charm and an eagerness that was captivating. There was a generosity of manner, guilelessness and a natural affability which could not but make people take to her. When she did not get the same affection in her husband's home, Uruvi felt perplexed. Days flew by fast, but Uruvi got to know her husband very gradually. Karna was attentive and devoted, just as he was with each family member. But Uruvi sensed a certain detachment in his devotion. "I find something missing, he is with his family, yet apart. Although surrounded by people who love him, Karna is so alone, never satisfied. It seems that he is always searching, always wondering who his natural parents are," she told herself. She noticed that no day would start without Karna paying obeisance to the early morning sun and then touching his parents' feet with quiet reverence, followed by giving alms to one and all, whoever visited him at the palace. Despite his outward calm, there seemed to be a constant turmoil in him, as if he were in quest of his true self. "And neither I nor anyone else can help him out," Uruvi admitted defeatedly to herself. His life had been one long bitter struggle which he did not allow himself to forget. It was distressing to watch him steeped in his angst, yet arrogant in his conviction about his innate worth. He valued his merit, but it was not enough for him until he was recognized and consecrated by society. As the king of Anga, the first duty Karna had taken upon himself was an oath. He swore that anyone who approached him with a request at midday, when he worshipped the sun, would not go away with his request unfulfilled. That was the reason why he would never allow anyone to leave empty-handed. Uruvi wondered, is that why he gave away alms so generously every noon? Was that unquenchable thirst for social recognition turning him into the most magnanimous of gift-givers? Was his philanthropy kindled by his need for self-glorification? Or was it an identification with the sun god and the inherent generosity of Surya? Or, more aptly, was it a driving need to imprint an unforgettable impression on society? He was the caring older brother to Shona, who clearly hero-worshipped him, the formality in their relationship tempered by a certain indulgence on Karna's side. He is still a child, he used to gently defend his younger sibling whenever Radha grumbled about him. He is more like a son to you, she would retort, and both mother and son would laugh together. Uruvi was witness to Karna's sporadic flashes of dry humor, especially among people who could understand his witty remarks. Karna was amusing and spirited if he allowed himself to relax. He had a fabulous memory for a funny story and was whimsical, sometimes indulging in pure fun. If Karna could make Uruvi laugh, and he did, she knew he could do the same with Vrushali too. Each time Karna glanced at Vrushali, Uruvi, despite herself, felt a red-hot jealousy and she hated herself for it. Watching them, she felt her eyes burning in their sockets, like burning coal. Gripped by envy, she could not speak as she watched them talk to each other softly one afternoon. He was the person she loved most wildly in the world, yet she hated him now as he listened to what his older wife had to say. As if sensing her eyes on them, they turned to look at her. Abashed, she stepped out of the room, ashamed of her own angry feelings. Anger was not a novel experience for her, but this flaming, searing jealousy was. She painfully reminded herself she was the interloper, not Vrushali. To her jealous eyes, they seemed much too comfortable with each other. Uruvi had not known a more devoted couple, but she could see that they had no dreams, no goal-driven desires. They were happy with each other, with their sons in the family, and did not crave for the wealth and status they did not have. But with her, the equation took a turbulent swing because Karna never let her forget that she was a Kshatriya princess, part of the elite. Off and on, Karna's moods swung between being volatile or merely dutiful, but nothing he did ever upset Vrushalli's amazing placidity. Vrushalli could calm him with just a look or a word. They never disagreed, which seemed to be in keeping with an unspoken pact. Once Uruvi had asked her husband if he ever quarreled with Vrushalli. No, he shrugged. We do not seem to have anything to squabble about. Vrushalli has the temper of an angel. Possibly, Uruvi retorted, bristling a little. But you don't. You are at times arrogant, aggressive and moody. Am I? You are the first person to say so. If I am all that and worse, it means that she suffers me, as you do. I had quite made up my mind never to fall in love with an insensitive boor, she dimpled. Are you sorry you did? He asked, his eyes twinkling. I was a perfect fool that I did. That bit of luck, or chance or fate or whatever poked in and took the matter out of my hands. She frowned at him. Her dark eyes had that look again, somewhat teasing, sometimes tender, that made his heart lurch. Her lips were slightly parted in a sigh. You are irresistible. He breathed softly, and kissed her parted lips. It was with his sons, Vrasasena, Shatrunjaya, Dvi Pada, Sushina, Satyasena, Chitrasena and Susharma, that Karna shrugged off his armor of polite reserve. Uruvi often watched them scrambling down the steep path in front of the palace in the mornings, racing their way to the grove of trees on the banks of the stream flowing by. As they splashed in the warm, shallow water, Karna was in his most elated spirits. She observed them with a small smile, the girl in her surfacing momentarily, longing to jump in and join them as well. She saw Karna laughing, shouting and singing boisterously. He might have been 13, as old as Susharma, and at no other time had Uruvi seen him so happy and vulnerable. There was such an appealing breeziness in him that Uruvi was amazed. These were such beautiful moments that it was like experiencing heaven. You seem to have enjoyed yourself enormously, she said one morning when he returned to the room. I always do. They are my best moments, he smiled, and Uruvi felt he had allowed her to enter his secret space. She smiled back at him, her eyes shining. When she was alone, Uruvi longed to express her wonder about her new relationship with her husband, to pour out her restlessness, but there was no one to confide in. She was surprised to find herself missing her mother acutely. She had always assumed she would miss her father intolerably, but, instead, she found herself wishing that she could rush to her mother and vent her emotion of the moment, whether it was anger, frustration or happiness, or just engage in idle talk. Though she longed for her parents and her opulent palace at Pukia, Uruvi found herself fascinated and considerably charmed by her husband's loving family and the frugality that was practiced in the household. She took some time getting accustomed to both. Uruvi toned down her lavish ways, self-conscious about being extravagant and ostentatious at times. She loved the hill on which her home stood, the teeming wilder of the forest, the birds with their colorful plumage and the brilliant butterflies fluttering by. She timidly began lending her personal touches wherever she could in the palace, arranging flowers in vases and decorating the rooms with artifacts, while Vrushalli looked on tolerantly. For her, it was beautiful being married and being Karna's wife. It was fulfilling to run his home, with kindly suggestions from Radha and Vrushalli, to potter around, read her texts and wait for her husband to return each evening. Most of all, it was wonderful not to brood about the future. Except for her jealousy, which sometimes surfaced, Uruvi knew she was extremely happy with her husband. They enjoyed each other's company, teasing playfully and laughing a lot every now and then. Even when other people were present, their eyes often met, exchanging a little private message. It was quite touching, even to the cynical Shona, and their relationship was blessed by Radha and Adiratha.